In terms of things that marketers do, so marketers spend, most of their day, doing content marketing, coming up with interesting stuff for you to read, putting out infographics, making webcasts, what have you. What is particularly effective, and alternatively, what is particularly ineffective or even perhaps offensive?
I'll let you lead.
We don't have to name names or anything.
No, we won't go there.
I think from what's an effective strategy, it's knowing who you're talking to, knowing enough about their organization, enough about their challenges. Whether if you're a CIO, if you're an IT director, if you're a project manager, program manager, they all have different roles. They have slightly different focuses. Ultimately, they're all probably trying to support a strategy or some end game. So to have knowledge of that organization, at least enough that you're coming into it with some level of knowledge and you're able to demonstrate value from the initial phone call, as opposed to the converse would be, tell me what I can do to help, or tell me what your problems are, which is less effective because you live those all day long and you're constantly rehashing those. So
that might not be a bad idea. Actually, write the memo. Here are my problems.
Here are my problems, and I could post them somewhere. And if you've got an hour that day, you might be able to have the conversation, but chances are you don't have an hour that day, and that's probably not the best time spent when it's all said and done.
Well, how about before the phone call? So, we know, and we've been reading, and Marketing Sherpa and even TechTarget's original research is showing that, hey, somewhere between 60 and 70% of the research, don't quote me on that number, might be 50, not sure, is done before the phone ever gets picked up, before a personal conversation even happens between a vendor and a potential customer, that somewhere 60, 70% of the research is done. First question, is that an accurate portrayal of how it's of that, or do you have a different perspective on that, more than half is done? And then the second question is, in that pre-vendor interaction or pre-direct vendor interaction, what are the things that marketers do that, that are useful or not?
I don't know the exact number of the percentage, but it's significant. But I think the difference is that while there may be a significant amount of research being done, you're still trying to understand the problem. You're still trying to understand how to attack the problem. So I think that a marketer coming in after the fact may be very successful if they're able to touch upon where the problem is currently sitting at that point. You've done some research. What are the questions? What are the things you're still struggling with? What are you trying to do to move forward, or are you able to move forward? Those are all different answers, depending on what the project is at that particular time. But the strategic part of this may be a very long period of time in terms of doing research and trying to figure out what the problem is, because you're ultimately trying to find out what what's the magnitude of your problem, and then how do I go about finding a solution to that? Yeah. And they don't always line up very easily. So often you're sort of in the middle of both of those questions. Yeah. And if somebody can get you further along on one side, then you can focus more on the other side and be able to get to some point, then you brought a lot of value.
So in that case, would a case study that was relevant, is that a good thing? If they were selling to, the town of Brookline, would it be a vertical, hey, here's...
Well, I was about to say that when I go onto a site or do investigation on a product and I look at the marketing materials, the two things that I think are most valuable to me is, first of all, understanding that if you look at a site or whatever, typically we have products and solutions. So if it gets into the solution part of it, and especially if the solution is broken down into verticals, that's particularly interesting to me. I'm in kind of the medical healthcare environment. If they have a healthcare vertical in there that talks about how the solution works, which may be a white paper or it may be a case study, I don't really, whatever it is to help me understand how that product benefits the healthcare environment, then that's going to be more interesting to me than seeing a list of products that just have a product that does different functions, but you really don't understand the concept of how this function would fit in the overall scheme.
So the context and the ecosystem.
The context of taking it to my business environment. Okay, I have a business solution I'm trying to solve. So if you can address if that solves a business solution or potential solutions, and then not only say what it may solve, but why it solves those solutions. That's really important. Okay. It's one thing to say we're good, cheap, and fast. It said we're good because we do this. We're cheap because we do this. we're fast because we do. They forget the because part
Uh-huh.
of it. So you just get good, cheap, and fast, and it really isn't in context to tell you what it
So
means.
that comes off as marketing speak. If
And
you
then
can't-
if it comes up and says it's good in the healthcare environment because versus it's good in the financial market because, that even helps qualify it even more.
Interesting.
So, and I've seen very good marketing sites that do that.
Yep.
And they'll say, we have an infrastructure product or a generic product, and yes, it does this, but however, if you look in our solutions, you'll see this is how it addresses the problem in each of the verticals.
Yeah, I wonder about that if you're like selling storage or something that, pardon me, storage vendors, that might be considered a commodity by some buyers. Is that actually useful to like say, hey, my spinning disk is really great for healthcare?
But perhaps it's an intelligent storage, and because of it does encryption on the fly, it allows you to be HIPAA compliant. Well, then now you've
Now
got
it's
a
a-
story versus, oh, I do encryption on the fly. Well, that's great. What does that really mean? Saying, well, that helps your encryption or your compliance because
Okay.
blah, 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 blah. Now you've got something that's got value to it.
So it's not just benefits, it's applied benefits.
It's applied benefits,
Okay.
how you actually apply it. I think that's something that the good marketing organizations you see really apply into their sites. And that helps us in our research. Because if we go down that and we look at our vertical and we see what it does, we go, well, I understand where they're coming from. That's not what I was looking at. Move on. That saves that vendor from having to do sales expense for something that I'm not going to buy, and it saves me to go on to my next research vendor.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting there.